Thank you so much for joining us. We will begin in 8 minutes. Thank you so much for joining us. We will begin in 7 minutes. Thank you so much for joining us. We will begin in 6 minutes. Thank you so much for joining us. We will begin in 5 minutes. Thank you so much for joining us. We will begin in 4 minutes. Thank you so much for joining us. We will begin in 3 minutes. Thank you so much for joining us. We will begin in 2 minutes. Thank you so much for joining us. We will begin in 1 minute.
Hello and welcome to ATARC's webinar series. Today, topic experts will share strategies that agencies can implement to alleviate the concern of the unknown and make operations more efficient. My name is Kirsten Patton, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's webinar. ATARC stands for the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center. And ATARC is a nonprofit organization that facilitates collaboration between government, industry, and academia in order to accelerate technology modernization initiatives. ATARC provides ongoing opportunities for cross-agency collaboration through on-site interaction, learning, and market research. I would like to welcome all of our attendees, and a special thanks to Raquel Rodriguez, Jay Ryan, and the entire Security Compass team. This afternoon, the plan is to hear from our panelists and have a Q&A session where we will pop in a few polls and answer any of our audience questions. Before we begin on that, I just want to encourage you at home to please submit questions of your own in the Q&A section of this platform. And also remember to answer the poll questions as they come up throughout today's event. Now, with that, I would love it if our panelists, they're already on camera, perfect. I will have you guys each introduce yourselves. So please share a little bit about who you are, what you do, what your agency or organization is all about, and anything else you'd like our audience to know up top. So Hannah, how about we start with you?
Hi, sure. Hi, my name is Hannah Hunt. I'm the Chief of Product at the Army Software Factory. We are headquartered at Army Futures Command here in Austin, Texas. And our main goal is to upskill soldiers so that they can build and deliver software capabilities for the force. In my role, I oversee all of our Software Factory product teams that build and deliver capabilities, as well as our DevSecOps environment. We co-lead that with the Army CIO that enables those applications in order to get into production and to talk with users. Previously, before I joined the Software Factory, I was the Chief of Staff at the Air Force's Software Factory, Kessel Run, where I kind of oversaw the operations of the organization, and joined this team of almost 2 years ago, right as I was employee number 3. So had to be hitting the ground early. So glad to be here.
Great. We're really happy to have you here. And Jay, let's hear from you next, please.
Sure. So I'm very happy to be here with the team. My name is Jay Ryan. I'm the U.S. Federal Program Manager at Security Compass. If you're not familiar with Security Compass, we create SD Elements, which is an AppSec tool that folks use to model out compliance ahead of building their apps. And so I've been there a little over a year and a half. And the goal of our team essentially is to support our federal clients and customers in their DevSecOps journey to ensure they build security in not just shipping left, but all the way from the beginning.
Fantastic. Well, to kick things off, I'm actually going to call for a poll question first. So poll question number 1, because this will play into my first question that I have. So if we could get that up on the screen. And remember, if you're at home and you want to receive your CPE credit, please be sure to respond to this poll question, which states, how do you see a primary roadblock to your DevSecOps organization? And there's a couple options here around tracking applicable controls and requirements, or is it acquiring and implementing architectural tools, or the time it takes to actually achieve the ATO deployment timeline, or something else? So please take a moment to respond to that, and I'll be curious to see what the results of that look like. But with that, we're also going to talk about it with our panelists about what some of these roadblocks are when it comes to the adoption of DevSecOps. So Hannah, let's start with you. As the Department of Defense and other federal agencies move toward a broader adoption of DevSecOps, what do you foresee as the primary roadblocks that organizations will need to overcome? And it looks like the majority of our responders said it's the time to achieve the authority to operate and the deployment timeline. Hannah, what are your thoughts about that?
That's a great question. So I think there's definitely multiple facets to this. The first one is from a talent management perspective, there's not a significant amount of knowledge around cloud or platform engineering within the department. So there's just a lack of knowledge on how you would accredit an environment that is in an on-premise data center. So there is also, that increases the level of risk aversion to being able to operate in those environments. Something that I see oftentimes is that there is an overemphasis on compliance versus security, in the sense of paperwork, making sure that what is being delivered checks all the various boxes, but rather not necessarily focus on what is a truly secure platform. Oftentimes they're complementary, and then at the same time, they're also anti-pattern. Making something compliant doesn't necessarily make it secure. And I think we see that with the way that authorities to operate are given in this department. For example, you can have a 3-year authority to operate, and that to a lot of organizations means that I'm not going to look at my environment for another 3 years when I have to go do my reauthorization, versus something that is continuously reviewed and continuously updated, even though that is a tenet of risk management framework. So talent management is a big piece of that. And the focus on compliance over security is another big pain point that the department faces. But that all comes back to talent management at the end of the day, and not having that skill and knowledge to be able to make those nuanced decisions and those risk-based decisions, versus something that says, well, you didn't check all these boxes and therefore you're not compliant and therefore I'm not giving you your ATO. It's something that has to be holistically looked at and in a way that makes informed decisions so that mission owners can complete their mission and deliver various software products to their user bases.
Yeah, thank you for that, Hannah. And I just want to note too, Tommy Wisdom, an audience member, wrote in saying that other roadblocks could include costs and just lack of defined way to achieve an ATO, even the FedRAMP website. So with that, Jay, I would love to hear from you on the same question next.
Yeah, so Hannah, of course, nailed that. I think what we do see is one, a failure to modernize and the struggle to modernize, which comes down to people. Obviously, you have folks who are having a hard time coming up to speed with, the architectures and technologies that are necessary to create a platform that can be ATO'd or CATO'd, and the ability to evaluate that. So people in legacy support architecture and processes, that haven't caught up and aren't operating in an agile nature, at the speed of development are a continual impediment. It's been honestly great to witness kind of the birth and evolution of the software factories and how they've really kind of created unified product teams that really have accelerated all the facets, from acquisition to delivery and sustainment for the app teams, as Nick Shalom would say, at the speed of relevance, right? That's really what's kind of changing things and overcoming a lot of these impediments. So I think you're seeing a course correction across also a number of neighboring sectors inside of technology, inside of defense and Fed, who are seeing what those teams are doing, and they're benefiting internally from those same approaches. So the benefit is everybody's kind of overcoming a lot of these roadblocks that organizations have been experiencing because of the innovations at the software factories.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for answering that for us. So Hannah, my next question is around the authority to operate and the authority to field in DoD and federal organizations has historically taken a great deal of time to achieve. So with the tools to support ATO and the authority of continuous authority to operate processes, what do you think organizations or what can organizations implement now in order to reduce this amount of time?
Yeah, that's great. Great question. There are several things that organizations can do. Firstly, oftentimes organizations feel like they need to build everything from the ground up, everything from the infrastructure to the platform layer to the app and data layer. And what's really neat about what we're doing within the Army is that we are abstracting away a lot of that at the enterprise level through the enterprise cloud known as the Army, through the enterprise DevSecOps environment known as Create, which we co-lead with the Enterprise Cloud Management Agency. So application owners only have a certain set of controls and security requirements that they need to maintain. Everything else is centrally managed on their behalf. So it's less work for a mission owner to have to build software because they don't have to build everything. They just have to build their portion of it. So in our organization currently, there's thousands of STIGs that are used across, an entire, all the way from your facility, like I said, up your infrastructure, up your level. And application teams in our organization only have to manage 53 controls. The rest are inherited. And that makes it really, really easy and fast for applications to iterate with their user base because they have less compliance things that they need to worry about and can instead focus on actually delivering value. We've been calling it an Army Continuous Risk Management Framework, or CRMF, but the notion of CATO is very similar concepts. I think it's just a nomenclature thing. The second thing is from a technology perspective, there's still very much a manual process when it comes to running security scans or running continuous integration. And oftentimes before, I've seen organizations have people whose sole job is to run Fortify scans or sole job is to run Trivy scans. And then they send them in CSV files to the app owner and said, you have some crits and some highs. So go and do this and then send the Excel spreadsheet back to me and I'll upload it into EMAS. And it just becomes this really painful, manual, like toilsome process. And so utilizing tools like utilizing CI/CD pipelines, we use GitLab CI a lot, and that bakes in a lot of our scanning resources. It makes it much easier to go faster because you have an automated security pipeline to make sure that what you're building is secure. That helps immensely. And then we have a Kubernetes-based platform too, which allows for like very much easily scale up and scale down based on that orchestration pattern, which again makes it very easy for application teams because a lot of that pain is abstracted away. they only have to really worry about their application in their database.
Thank you, Hannah. And Jay, I love how we have the industry perspective on this panel too. So what, based on, Hannah's response or just the question in general, can you provide to us from your standpoint?
Yeah, so, I mean, I feel like Hannah was reading my notes. I wish I would have went first on this question, right? It wouldn't sound like I'm just parroting what she had to say. So no, for us, of course, our business is all about creating those baselines and controls. And so the big thing for speeding this up and kind of overcoming the implementation issues is creating those tailored and controlled baselines, standardization of those baselines, developing inheritance of those baselines, understanding what's already been, inherited through, microservice architectures. If you're building an app, can you pull from other already approved pieces and parts to allow you to build something greater and inherit all those secured application pieces from those microservices. Really, that's what we like to say shift left, but that's what really allows teams to shift all the way to the beginning, right? They start from a secure point versus having to figure out how to build security in. And then also it helps to model, from the beginning in tools which allow you to define what your exposure is. As Hannah said, their teams already have a smaller set of exposure from the app side that they have to work with. If they have the tool sets to model how to best meet that exposure, and then carry that into some type of automated fashion of reporting. I think where we get to as an industry is the ability to automate a lot of this. And you'll probably hear me reiterate that with some of the other responses is automation. How can we make reporting simple? How can we take the burden off of some of these security teams and the app teams to have to hand jam these findings and reports back into messaging back and forth between them and the ISOs and ISMs, and make it kind of a seamless transfer of data.
Great, thank you for those additional insights. So panelists, Jay and Hannah, I also want to draw your attention over to our audience questions section. If you're able to see those, we have quite a few coming in. So if you guys could please take a moment to review the first couple, and I'm going to call for a poll question to give them time to read over at least the first question that comes through. So if our events team could please post our second poll question, and we'll take a minute for the audience to respond to the poll, and then we'll answer the audience questions that have just come in. So thank you guys for sending these. This is great. Okay, so the first audience question is, has anyone done at least a high-level NIST control mapping to DevSecOps practices, tasks performed in a CI/CD pipeline or something else? And if so, where could that mapping be located? So Hannah or Jay, if you guys have a response to that, just to the best of your ability, or any information that you may be able to provide to Keith, go ahead and come off mute. Yes, Jay. Yeah,
so I mean, not to sound like the industry hack, right? But that's what SD Elements as a product does. We spend a lot of time really digging into, we have a complete compliance group headed up by some very big PhD smart guys who just, what they do is digest NIST all the time and map those controls against best practices and actually implementing DevSecOps tasks that marry up to those control sets. So if you're looking to learn more about that, we have a lot of free resources available on our website, which don't require you to interact with us in any way or try to get pitched or sold. So happy to make those available. Come check that out on the website.
Thank you. Good question, Keith. And then Hannah, there's a question specific to you. So it's from Razvan in our audience. He says, as you have said, it can take years until someone looks again at a system to check if it is vulnerable or up to date in terms of software. My question is, do you see a real solution to this? And to whom should we attach this authority to in managing in a real time the systems themselves? So would that be private or industry, public, or the government? Any insight to that question that you could provide?
Yeah, so at the end of the day, the authorizing official is the one that's making the risk on your environment. They're saying, yes, I accept the risk. And I think because it's such a decentralized role, there's hundreds of authorizing officials across the department. There's a need, I think, even at the DoD CIO level, and I think they recognize this with a lot of the policies they're putting out currently, to hold AOs accountable and their ISMs and their compliance staff to having that continuous monitoring, that continuous validation of controls. And there are obviously some AOs that are better than others in that regard, and really do want to provide that holistic risk picture versus, okay, I did my job, I spent 18 months getting this reauthorization, and then I'll see you again in 2 years when we restart it again. And so it's partially holding AOs accountable to their mandate as an authorizing official. So it's not necessarily a software solution. There are software solutions. Jay is absolutely correct around SD Elements. It's a fantastic resource for that. Utilizing other types of like stick checkers and some of the other things that have been built to help automate some of those compliance activities is really critical, but it becomes a cultural thing that if we do as a department want to champion this continuous authority to operate, this continuous risk management framework, that it starts at the authorizing official level to mandate that across the organization. And we're really fortunate, at least within the Software Factory and Create and CRME, that we have a authorizing official that does take that approach and does hold us accountable and does have us consistently reviewing our compliance and security posture to make sure that what we're doing is both from a compliance perspective in alignment, but also from a security perspective in alignment. But some AOs, that's sometimes too few and far between, if I'm being a little candid. And so it's really at the DoD CIO level and at the service CIOs to say, hey, no, like this is a real thing and we're going to hold you accountable to it, or you're going to lose your authorizing privileges.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just tag on that real quick, Hannah, too. I went to RSA a couple of weeks back, and they had a tremendous public safety industry day. And I had the opportunity to talk to a couple of high-level folks. Chris DeRush and a lot of folks came and presented there. And there is an appetite for discussing this. I think they're getting their hands around the requirements in the EO. And then the next thing they're going to tackle is kind of Fed-wide, CATO, ATO, and how to consolidate that. So I think they are talking about that now.
Wonderful. All right. And then last audience question before we pivot back to mine. What is the DoD's thought position on the need to review vendors' source code as part of their DevSecOps and CI/CD process? Also, do you have thoughts on placing vendor software into DoD-centric container repositories prior to distribution through programs of record to supply systems?
Yeah, I can start and then pass off to Jay. But so there's a couple ways to think through that. I think anytime we bring in commercial off-the-shelf software, there is a requirement through the app dev stig, some of the other stigs and SRGs to review the source code or review the security posture of the software before it's brought into the environment. And there's ways to do it that are very waterfall, and that you takes a very manual time, or you can run a set of security scans against it and make sure that there's no like higher critical CVs or whatever your threshold is. I do believe that the DoD should be doing that. This comes back to the notion of the secure supply chain and the executive order around zero trust to have a better security posture. We've seen recently some big commercial software have massive vulnerabilities on them, and that's a risk to the organizations and mission sets that require use of those software. From a container repository perspective, there's definitely value in having a centralized place for people to know that, hey, this COTS solution does have a sets only authorization or a provisional ATO. I think DISA does a lot of that as well at the DoD level. Obviously, FedRAMP does also at the federal level, but making that something that's easily accessible is very valid. But what it comes back to is, how is that software being maintained? I could stick a piece of COTS software in a container repository and then never look at it ever again, but it's approved in a system. So it makes it look like it's approved, but really it's riddled with vulnerabilities and 0 days. So there needs to be, if people are using centralized repositories like that, there needs to be some form of service level agreement or understanding on how that software is going to be maintained and updated and upgraded, and put some of that onus on the vendor to do so, but even the mission owner that wants to use that piece of software, they've got to make sure that it meets the requirements to be used in their environment.
Thank you, Hannah. Go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, so I think you're seeing part of that already happening, between Iron Bank and Big Bang and stuff like that, for that typical architecture, that question, right? And it's been successful to a degree, and it's still a challenge if you're a cost provider, being able to, like you said, Hannah, keep updated software that's relevant and, again, not vulnerable on a regular basis in those platforms. So that's a growing area for sure. I think the other piece, though, is going to be the little hidden gem inside of EO, which we'll probably talk about here in a minute, but the SSDF, Secure Software Development Framework, that's going to get pushed down, and that's primarily going to affect COTS providers. We're going to have to come into compliance with SSDF before they submit their software for consumption as COTS to the US government, and hopefully that process kind of nips a lot of this off before it gets to folks like Hannah and her team to have to try to use and build with for end products.
Absolutely. And thank you for helping me segue into my next question around the EO. So we previously just had the poll up about, is your organization prepared to meet the EO 14028 requirements? So my next question, Hannah, if you want to respond to this one first, is that the executive order has had a major impact in regard to timelines to implement requirements within the community. So in your opinion, what will be those leading challenges to ATO and continuous ATO from that EO 14028?
Yeah, excellent question. So they're very aggressive timelines in that executive order, and it demonstrates a sense of urgency when it comes to like our supply chain processes. So like I understand the timelines to get things in lockstep with what needs to happen. It's going to be a rude awakening, I think, for a lot of organizations. When we had that massive vulnerability at the end of last year around Log4j, seeing how long it took for organizations to patch all of those systems was a testament to how manual and slow the authority to operate and see it process is currently. People have to go to change control boards and submit a firewall requests and do tickets. And it becomes this very laborious process versus, hey, there's a 0-day vulnerability and you need to execute and you need to fix it now. So in our organization, we were able to do that within 24 hours, all of our systems. Now, at the same time, 3-4 weeks after the 0-day, I'm getting reports from other organizations within the Army that still were riddled with these findings. So one, there needs to be a sense of urgency amongst the organizations themselves to say, hey, I don't want this vulnerability in my environment, but also, again, holding AOs accountable and holding mission owners accountable, that there are specific timelines assigned to these crits and highs that need to be remediated. So it's a wake-up call, I think, to the community. This is, hey, you need to get your act together. And then the federal government's going to hold you to it, both from an organizational government perspective, but even, vendors who are trying to sell, various software products into the DoD. Like your software better be on lock. Like you better have a good path forward for any vulnerabilities that come out. And we've been seeing some of that recently. Some are very good on it, and others are not. And it's very clear who has a sense of urgency, and that's where the government should make bets on like how they invest their resources into those COTS products.
Well said. Jay, what are some of your thoughts about that?
Sure. From an industry standpoint, SBOM is taking a lot of focus, as is Zero Trust. You couldn't walk around RSA and swing a stick without hitting a sign that said Zero Trust somewhere. And there's a lot of differing opinions on the SBOM approach. So right now you have industry folks who are having a hard time deciding what's going to be their artifact management piece, what's going to be the leading standard in which SBOMs are translated and shared. All these things are going to cause a lot of grief for folks when you work with one customer and they want their SBOM and SPDX, and you go to another one and they want it in Cyclone DX, and you realize you've spent a ton of money on an enterprise license for a tool that doesn't give you Cyclone DX export possibilities, right? So that's just like a minor tip of the spear on things which, people are trying to figure out and come to terms with. But from a further challenge standpoint, last question, we talked about SSDF. and people who, probably have small teams that build a lot of their COTS software, right? But make some type of critical piece that's highly useful, and their ability to understand those requirements and have people in their teams which can help them build and meet those requirements and then demonstrate that. So that can be ingested and used by the government and customers is going to be probably a larger challenge down the road that I foresee coming.
Hannah, this next audience question is for you. Tim Angelos at home says, sounds like great progress. Has Army seen significant acceleration of application development? More secure software developed faster, or any other examples that you could share with us?
Absolutely. So Army Software Factory is a great example of that being operationalized, implemented. On average, we are getting applications from discovery into production in about 90 to 120 days. And a lot of that is like their discovery work on like what they're going to be solving. So applications are pushing code on a weekly basis and making updates to their code base because we have a playbook signed by the Army CIO that enables this process, this continuous RMF process. So right now, Army Software Factory has 10 applications that are in production, and we've only been developing software for about a year. So like that's really good, and actually like pretty impressive even by industry standards. And we're developing software across like a broad array of capabilities. We're working with the Sergeant Major of the Army on the This Is My Squad initiative to help squad leaders, working on preventative maintenance, land and resource allocation, ammunition safety. It's just a huge swath of capabilities. And that's really showing that you can build software in a way, one, with soldiers that are learning how to build software, which is the big selling point to us and our value proposition, but also that we can actually operationalize DevSecOps in the Army in a way that is scalable and repeatable. Something that's kind of the bread and butter of the Create environment, the DevSecOps ecosystem within the Army, is the notion of having security developer advocates. These are, we call them application security validation engineers. And their main job is to enable application teams to understand why security is important in their development process. They guide them, consult them, support them, and getting through their STIGs and reviewing their security scans and helping them also code in a secure way, making sure that their code quality is high, making sure that they have test coverage across their application. And that's a real benefit and like secret sauce of what's making the software factory go very quickly, is because we have this team that is dedicated to enabling developers to push security to the left and actually care about it, and be there as a support instead of somebody that says, no, you can't do a thing. Rather, they are an enabler and an advocate for security as somebody who they are application developers turned security professionals. It's a really neat role. And we've been able to see that across the board with all these applications that are in production and are constantly being iterated upon.
Thank you, Hannah, and great audience questions. So please continue to send them in along with any comments that you may have. So my next question, Jay, I would love to start with you on this one, but often ATO requirements are tailored by the organization and assessors based on their tolerance of risks. So as organizations move towards continuous authority to operate, do you see RMF versus other continuous authority to operate models as an either or situation, or is there some kind of middle ground for both?
That is a great question. I think there's definitely a middle ground. Both approaches are typically based in the NIST standards, 853, et cetera, from those models. Where you typically see the departure point is the administrative errata, right, of the reports and other artifacts that are generated. There should be a standard or at a minimum understanding a higher level between what you're seeing with the ATO memo and other movement to accept multiple end results, right? I think that's pointing to them pushing towards accepting multiple approaches for ATO. At the end of the day, it's all about how they're going to share that data and recognize each other's data. And I think the best we can do from an industry standpoint is, help distill down that mountain of paperwork, which typically makes up that ATO assessment process, to make it easier to complete by the dev teams as they go along from the beginning, and the security teams, again, reiterate, implementing automation and support within the SDLC for the creation of that data and the maintaining of that data as it moves across the entire SDLC, and then have the ability to, hey, if Army Software Factory wants to see it in the CRMF format and Navy Forge wants to see it in this other RMF format, having the ability to, check a box and say, put it into this report format in some type of automation way at the end so that everyone is happy and you can continue moving at a faster pace.
Thank you. And Hannah, did you have any additional insight into that question? I'm happy to repeat it if you'd like.
Yeah, that actually be great. I was responding to that one message around like what code or how we build our software applications. Yeah, if you could repeat, that'd be great.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So just that as organizations move towards continuous authority to operate, how do you see RMF versus other continuous authority to operate models? Is it an either or situation, or is there some kind of middle ground for both?
Yeah, it's my somewhat spicy take. We use spicy takes here in the Army Software Factory, but RMF is continuous RMF if you do it correctly. The 6 steps of RMF include step 6 is continuous monitoring. So if you're actually following real RMF, then you are doing continuous risk management framework. Now I know the DoD CISO has put out some guidance and memos around how the department can operationalize the ATO, and that is a solid example of like what would need to change from a culture perspective and from an implementation perspective. But at the same time, you can easily do it now with the guidance that you have, because you just have to take organizations really just need to take the risk on of being like, I'm not just going to sit on these STIGs for 2 years. Rather, I'm actually going to implement step 6 of RMF and move forward with that continuous monitoring. What we do here with Create is that every 30 days we review a certain set of STIGs, and we say, okay, are we still in compliance with these STIGs? Then we do another batch of STIGs, and so there's this continuous cycle of review versus it being like a one and done. I've done this, spent 6 months starting over again, but rather something that is continuous, and that you can do right now. Any organization can do that right now.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, well, I see we have a bunch more audience questions coming in, which is great. Everyone's super awake today. We'll start with the first one, and Jay or Hannah, when you have a response, just go ahead and come off mute. That way I know that you want to answer this. But Dayton Williams says, what advancements of automation are you seeing down the pike for ATO? If you could automate a process with a magic wand, what would you want automated?
Yeah, I can get started. Gosh, would I love to reduce manual code reviews with my greatest heart and soul. I know that there is there's still a risk aversion around trusting developers to code securely. But if you're using actual CI/CD pipelines and you're having guardrails that don't allow teams to push to prod unless they meet their specific thresholds in the security scans, then manual intervention can be reduced significantly. Now, there will always be false positives and nuances, and you've got to sort those out. But at the end of the day, that's where the automation is less manual review, more automation, putting more trust, not zero trust, but putting more faith that the developers are actually building in the correct way and using the correct coding practices. So it's more of a cultural thing because the technology exists already. It's just rather enabling that to happen.
Yeah, line of trust is huge. So if you're an assessor at the end of the line, if you can automate all the data coming to you in a near real time, you can go back and see it how it was in time, kind of almost like phasing. And then you have the ability to track a line of trust all the way back to that developer who wrote that individual piece, instead of versus trying to get to a team and ask them, hey, how did you guys build this securely? Again, throttling that data all the way through to a line of trust would be huge.
All right. And then the next question I'm going to ask from Brianne O'Brien is, how can an organization come to terms with satisfying security requirements in their contract versus greater security requirements potentially imposed by an AO?
Oh, people are talking my contracting language. So I'm an acquisitions person by trade turned like software person. So this comes back to how contracts are written. We are typically very prescriptive in what needs to be done, like overly prescriptive on what we need a vendor to do. And instead, if you keep it high level enough, like you need to meet an authority to operate, or you have to comply with XYZ regulations, that gives you, the government, like the benefit of saying, hey, if my AO says I need to meet these certain thresholds, the NIST guidelines probably aren't changing that much, in the sense of like, if they do quarterly updates, but you don't have to exactly put the controls that you want implemented. So keeping contracts flexible, having objectives versus requirements, statement of objectives versus performance work statements, or something that is more very statement of work that's more explicit, will allow you the flexibility, so that if your AO does say, hey, this posture is changing and I need to do XYZ, you don't have to do a contract modification for it. Rather, it's already baked into the requirement.
Go ahead, Jay.
No, I was just going to say, I like the contracting view that Anna takes on that. DAU alums unite, right? At the end of the day, you can go into a contract and take the contract. And when you get in, you're always going to find out there's other things you didn't know. And a lot of times that's going to be around those security requirements. You have to flex to that to meet those. And so if you took a contract, won a contract, and weren't prepared for that, then you just really didn't do your homework. If you want to take a spicy take, like you weren't prepared to enter into that venture to begin with. So that's usually on the end user, not to be negative on that one.
And Jay, we have a question specific for you from Rizvan. He says, I have noticed oftentimes in various industries, such as the healthcare industry, online pharmaceutical companies, and so on, that they are usually non-compliant towards patching their own systems. How do you think that we can get all of these industries, and ultimately a lot of companies that tend to follow their own directions, how do we get them to implement some of these new governmental standards?
Yeah, absolutely. So unfortunately, they fall under the organizations which govern their bodies, FDA, et cetera. And like I said earlier, a lot of the other Fed organizations that we speak to are benefiting from the learnings that the software factories and everyone else are doing as far as security goes. But at the end of the day, it's going to be down to FDA and other regulating bodies to come in and say, look, you got to be this level certified. You got to have your high trust, you got to have your HIPAA, et cetera. And they've really got to push that down the same way that it's happening inside of DoD. The DoD's setting the model, the standard, and it's got to proliferate across the rest of Fed.
Excellent. All right, we have 2 more audience questions. We'll answer those. This may be some of our last audience questions, but if you want to send them in the next couple minutes or so, we may be able to answer them. So that said, Annie Sokol has a question for either of you. Has the US been doing basically crowdsourced development across agencies and opening AI platforms such as Power BI to across an agency and even between agencies? Do you have any lessons learned or perhaps guardrails and competencies, capabilities needed to be mature, such as the automated CI/CD pipelines? So, Hannah, I saw you nodding your head. Do you have a response for this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So we, within the Army, have, like I mentioned, our DevSecOps playbook, which documents the security guardrails that application teams need to maintain in order to go to production. If you check out army.bil/ECMA, there's a link to that playbook, so you can take a read. You have to have a CAC card to access it, sorry. But it basically outlines like the process of which applications can go to prod and continuously go to prod, so long as they meet those security thresholds. Now, that is not unique to us. Many organizations in the Air Force have a very similar model. We've just kind of codified it in a playbook that can be used and distributed for any organization in the Army that would like to leverage it. From a crowdsourcing perspective, there's been a big push. Code.mil that's been run through Defense Digital Service. General Services Administration has a similar shared GitHub repo for things. And so there is that push across both the Defense Department and other civilian agencies to cross-share on code. I think you're seeing some of that as well with some of the Platform One efforts that Jay mentioned, being able to have shared repositories for infrastructure as code or CI/CD pipelines, et cetera. We're trying to do something very, very similar within the Army to have that shared repository that people can leverage for bringing containers into our environment. But there's also a lot of nuance too. So environments are configured in a particular way. So you can't totally have this like cross applicability and say, if it runs in this environment, it's going to run in this environment. There's just a lot more nuance to it, but you can still take like the high level practices and the lessons learned to, work on whatever your mission set needs or your authorizing official is comfortable with.
Thank you, Hannah. Go ahead, Jay.
And just an extension of that, you're seeing a lot of this in academia too. So a lot of the affiliated defense research groups inside the universities, it's not necessarily a crowdsource, but they open it a lot to them for research and pull. So if you're a member of one of those organizations, typically you might have access and an ability to get there.
All right, next question from Debbie Kennedy. Hey, Debbie. When the federal issues a mandate to all commercial systems receiving an FED ATO, who is required to pay for these changes, especially when the changes are very expensive? Is there any insight our panelists could offer there?
Yeah, I mean, so as a fellow industry, person, there's different approaches. I mean, there's the CMMC approach where you'd be able to write some of that off on your bid and proposal process to recover or at least mitigate some of those costs, right? And then the other piece of that is it's going to be a pay to play. If you want to do Fed business, there's a bar you got to reach and it's going to cost, and you got to cover that in some of your overhead and G&A expenses to be able to offset that.
Right, fantastic. And last question from Ed Aguirre. Can the DoD invest in the standardization of ATO process where the majority of standardizations are determined, where industry can invest in compliance from their end? This way, the investment is coming from the Pentagon and industry.
You want me to jump on that grenade first, Hannah? Yeah. I mean, the short answer to that, Ed, is going to be, I mean, they do invest in that heavily with NIST and everyone else as far as what it takes to put these regulations together and then get them out to the industry. The second piece of that is, I mean, there's not a good solution to that because the vulnerabilities are always changing. The attack surfaces are already changing. The area from which, new, novel, and inventive ways to compromise your systems is changing. So by the time you take a waterfall approach to really doing the research and putting those things out there, a lot of times they've already been surpassed with new techniques to get at us.
Thank you, Jay. Hannah, any comment or go ahead?
Oh yeah, I'm totally aligned with Jay. I think that there is an attempt to standardize. You see, but the NIST controls, you see the security requirements guides coming out from DISA, but AOs always have their own flavor of desire, and because it's a decentralized role and competency, you will have to tailor, and it's just the nature of the beast, unfortunately. That's why there's been a big push for reciprocity for implementation, because of that need to support that standardization more so, but also reduce the burden on organizations to have to literally redo stuff over and over again just to make particular AOs feel more comfortable. So at least in the Army, we're really pushing for that reciprocity, which is why we have such a limited amount of controls that application teams need to maintain. But at the end of the day, the authorizing official takes on the risk of the system. And so if they want a particular thing done, they have to do the thing.
Yeah. All right, thank you both for your responses. And now I'm going to call for our third and final poll question. So that should be up on our screen momentarily. Does your organization provide access to continuous learning training opportunities? So this poll actually segues really nicely into one of my final questions for you all. And that would be that people play a major part of the ATO process. So how, as a community, do we do a better job of educating and bringing our community together to accelerate ATO and the adoption of continuous authority to operate? my mind just blinked out for a second. Practices. Jay or Hannah, either one of you, please take this first. It looks like based on the responses to the poll, a lot of people said yes, so that's a good thing, but I would love to hear from our panelists on this.
Yeah, I can start. So that's really the bread and butter of the Army Software Factory. At the end of the day, our goal is to build the competency of agile software development and DevSecOps within the Army by training and upskilling soldiers to have that competency. We see it as a strategic imperative for the future operating environment that soldiers have the ability to build and deliver software capabilities at the edges of the battlefield. And that means investing significantly in that level of upskilling and enablement. So we have a 6-month coding boot camp that we put all of our cohort members through. And then they are here for 3-year assignments, and they are being enabled and pairing with industry experts to eventually be able to train other soldiers as more soldiers come through each cohort. And so that methodology and those teachings is what is really our mission. We're building that future force design that has soldiers being able to have that competency. This also means that we need the other pieces of the Army, not just soldiers, but authorizing officials, ISMs, to be able to understand those same models when it comes to CATOs and cloud engineering and platform engineering. So while we're having a lot of, investing in soldiers to be able to do that because of their strategic environment that we're seeing ourselves in 2030 and beyond, is not lost on me that it is also incredibly important for the civilian workforce, including myself, to have that level of upskilling. Because if we're not investing holistically across the department, a real detriment to being able to meet our mission requirements, especially in that future operating environment.
Thank you, Hannah. And Jay, would you like to respond to that as well?
Sure. So, again, the factories are doing a fantastic job with their cohort training. I wish when I was in the service, something like that existed, to have that opportunity to go and learn and train and skill up in that quick of a fashion. But at the end of the day, it's all about the education and training and how they build that into a process which pushes it down to the very lowest levels. So a dev should have easy access to remedial training anytime he needs it versus, relying on annual training, or, if you're in the process of actually, banging out some code and you run to a block on, how to accomplish something as far as connecting for security or things of that nature, you can't be taken out of that focus level, to go and look up and find these answers. You need to have, resources at your fingertips to be able to do that in line with, completing your jobs as you're doing that. So having that education, that just-in-time training, things of that nature available kind of on demand is kind of really where it's at. Defense U, everyone else, they're doing a tremendous job inside of DoD to do that. So I'm really personally a big fan and champion a lot of the educational efforts there that are making available.
Absolutely. Another audience comment is great and informative meeting. Love you all. We love you too. Live long and prosper. That being said, we are coming to the end of our panel. So if you do have any last minute pressing questions, please send those in and we'll do our best to get those answered before we run out of time. With that said, a little bit of housekeeping. I believe we have one final poll question around our CPE credits and if you would like them emailed to you or not. So please go ahead and respond to that to ensure that you receive it for your participation today. And with that, let's see if we have another audience question. Nope. Okay, we're good there. So Hannah and Jay, now that we are at the end of our discussion, I would love to hear from you on final thoughts and key takeaways. So what do you think out of this entire approach and discussion is just the most important thing you really wanted to get across to our audience that you hope they have a better understanding of now that this hour has come to an end? And what they can take back to their agency or organization to do better and help us all learn from one another. So Hannah, I will turn it over to you first.
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway and what I would really think about is the software factories are not unique in this. They the Army Software Factory, the other software factories have invested in this model, but it doesn't mean other organizations can't do it. I was recently talking to a PEO around the CRMF process that we employ here. They're like, gosh, wow, I wish we could do that. You can do it. You actually can. And it's hard. There's institutional inertia all the time. There's culture change that's required, but you can take the same methodologies and processes that the software factories have implemented to meet your mission needs in embedded systems and software intensive systems. Like, it is all in the realm of possibility. We're seeing this in embedded systems currently. We're seeing it with software intensive systems, that if you have the right leadership and the right culture push to do things differently, you too can have this model of where you're pushing code on a weekly basis or on a daily basis. You can instrument Fedora metrics. You can have automation. There's immense that you can do. So it seems bleak sometimes trying to fight that battle, but you can do it. And the Army and the Department of Defense has tons of resources out there. The DoD CIO website has a ton of resources that you can leverage to make that case for your organization. So I'd say take the risk, take the leap, try it. I bet you won't be disappointed.
Yeah, well said. I love that. Thank you, Hannah. And where can people connect with you? Are you involved in any organizations, ATARC or other, or places like LinkedIn that they could find you?
Yeah, I feel like I'm on an ATARC panel like monthly, which is great. I love it. So I'm on LinkedIn, Hannah Hunt, Hannah Feldman Hunt. That's my main name. So you should be able to find me. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. You can also check out our website, armyfeaturescommand.com/softwarefactory. And you can kind of see what we're doing there. I also sent the link, I think, for the ECMO website as well on the Cricut side. So yeah, I'm very active on LinkedIn. So let's connect.
Wonderful. And then Jay, over to you for your closing thoughts and key takeaway, as well as where folks can continue to connect with you online.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love the positivity that Hannah left out with, which is where we need to be. ATO used to be this nebulous thing. People were scared of it. It used to cost a lot of time and money. It's not that anymore. The model's been broken. The software factories have given us all something to aspire to. I think in the very near term, there'll be a lot of reciprocity between the different organizations. And you will probably see Hannah leading a webinar again on best practices for folks who like the FAA or someone else weird, right? Because I get asked a lot how to best do it. I had a lot of conversations with the folks at RSA from the commercial side, who we always think the commercial side is doing things way better. They're chaos engineering and breaking things and deploying 1,000 times a minute. We may not be there quite yet in the Fed, but we're doing some really good things right. And there are lessons to be learned from what's been done so far to get your software into the Fed community and used by people who really need it most, the warfighters and end users on the mission. So you can find me on LinkedIn. Jay Ryan. I'm pretty discoverable under Security Compass. I'm also a member of AFCEA and a couple of organizations, but look forward to speaking to anyone who wants to talk about ATO or federal compliance.
Excellent. Well, thank you both so much for your time today. I also want to thank the viewers back home for sending in questions and comments and being so interactive. I really love that. And of course, I want to thank our partners at Security Compass for helping us put on today's event. So we hope to see everybody at our next one. I think that information will be up on our screen here shortly. There you go. It'll be July 7th on accelerating zero trust. There you go. I think it was Jay, zero trust implementations with network visibility. And that's another free webinar session. You can go on our webpage and register for it there. But I look forward to further connecting with everybody, and everyone have a great week. Have a great 4th of July if I don't talk to you before then. Bye.